Business Connections Live, the UK's leading online business channel. This is Business Connections Live with Steve Hyland.
Hello there, welcome along. This is Business Connections Live, the programme for entrepreneurs, SMEs and also business owners. Now, on today's show, we're going to be discussing how SMEs can gain access to export finance. My guest on today's show is Gabby Buck, Managing Director of GKB Ventures Limited and Chairman of the British Bankers Association Export Finance and Trade Committee. That must be a heck of a card.
It's a series of cards. I think.
Series of cards available now. Gabby, lovely to have you on the programme. Whenever you say the word banker, all of a sudden there's all sorts of connotations will come in to your mind's eye and you'll start thinking to yourself, here we go then. They're going to be doing all sorts of horrible things to us small businesses. Do you think businesses as such at the moment really have got the wrong end of the stick when it comes to the reputation of bankers out there? Or the banking industry? Yes
and no. I think they quite rightly feel aggrieved in terms of what happened in 2007 and 2008. But time has moved on and there's been a lot of change in regulation within the banking industry. The banking market that you have today is very different from the past. And so therefore, I think they were right to be aggrieved of then. I don't think that they are right to be aggrieved for today.
Does it annoy you when you hear the banker bashing continuing?
Not so much annoying, I just feel it frustrating in that this country in particular seems to have a big wedge between government, industry and banking. And it harps back to the past. And it's very unique to the UK. You don't hear that in the US, you don't hear that in Europe, you don't hear that in Asia. No, people are looking to do business and they realise that they need to have a much more integrated approach between the three. And for some reason, the UK is still very much, harping on us to the ills of the past and the finger pointing, and I don't think that's helpful.
We're always trying to get one big point out straight away, really, to show the usefulness of what we're going to be talking about today. As small businesses, when they're approaching you, what do you think the biggest mistake a small business or even medium-scale businesses are making when they are approaching the bank for finance in general?
I think that it's a huge question. I think, and it's very
difficult. We've got an hour.
Okay, but it's very difficult to generalise that. But I think, generally speaking, there's a lack of pre-positioning by the exporter in terms of making sure that the underlying contract is robust and bankable. I think the way that they approach a bank and the language that they use with that bank is not fitting with the requirements that the bank is looking for. So often there's a miscommunication.
It's a big call on banks though, isn't it? It's a big ask when you're going to a bank for them to understand the individual marketplace. I mean, I know they understand the money aspects of it, but the diversity of business, be it to Europe or be it to other territories, the diversity of the kind of business and what the business involves. How can the banks claim to be experts on all of that? Surely they're just looking at a single individual piece, which is the money bit.
And that is part of the problem. I think prior to 2007, 2008, banks, any bank up and down the UK, would lend money on the back of a one-page business proposal. The requirements today, particularly the regulatory requirements on the banks, require that bank to do much more due diligence on the end customer and the customers in country. And so therefore, if you're an SME and you're looking for an export, you need to be picking a bank that really understands that market, that sector, that geography. And so therefore, it's unlikely to be your high street local bank.
It's going to be a specialist.
It's going to be a specialist. And I think the benefit that UK SMEs have got, and this is with my BBA hat on, London, the DNA of the City of London, is made up of international trade. You have all of the major international banks. They all have expertise in trade finance, and it's all here. And what an SME needs to do is be very cognizant of both the regulatory requirement and the changes that's going on in the banking industry, and pick that particular bank in a much more educated way.
You're talking very knowledgeably, and of course people won't know who you are at all. Tell us a little bit about who you are, Gabby.
Well, by profession, I'm a banker.
We know that.
We know that. 35 years as a banker, dealing in the real economy. 25 years working as the head of export finance at a big international bank. I'm also the managing director of GKB Ventures, which is an advisory consultancy business helping SMEs access funding for exports in a more timely and efficient manner. I'm also the chairman of the British Bankers Association on Export Finance and Trade, which is representing the industry, trying to get better regulation and ensuring it's a much more efficient market for exporters. And I'm also been heavily involved with the Coal Commission, which is a government parliamentary review, helping to steer UK government's policy in terms of exports. The UK government have a target of £1 trillion per annum of exports by 2020. And I was asked by the Graham Cole, who was chairing that commission, to provide input in terms of what the government needs to do to make sure that our trade deficit, which is appalling, is changed and a much more positive outlook for UK economy.
Do you think there's a big divide between the government perception of what small businesses are looking for and what small businesses actually need? Is there a big gap there in the realisation of what reality truly is?
No, I think the gap is I think UK government and the governmental departments have a really good understanding as to what the challenges are. The difficulty is it's hard to find the solution, and I think there needs to be a much more joined up approach within government.
Now we attended a CBI meeting a couple of weeks back, and there does seem to be a number of differing views out there between all the different bodies that are out there that are either representing small businesses or are helping small businesses. How can we bring them all together so that everybody is singing off the same hymn sheet?
There are so many stakeholders and different interested parties who can provide advice. It is a minefield.
So who do you go to? All of them.
Well, I wouldn't advocate that. I think that you just go to those who you feel comfortable with. You can go to UKTI, you can go to CBI, you can go to British Exporters Association, you can go to lawyers, you can go to accountants, Federation of Small Businesses, the list is endless. Or you can go to people like myself who are independent and can provide that advice. And there are many of us in the market.
So is that where the confusion, do you believe, actually comes in then? The fact that there is so much choice to get the information that you need?
Correct.
Everything's out there.
Correct.
So how does a small business then make up his mind? How does he know what's going to be right for him? Is it trial and error? It's a bit like saying you don't know whether you've got a good accountant until you get your next accountant. So is that the situation that small businesses find themselves? They don't know whether they're getting the right advice until they do from somebody get the right advice?
Well, most small businesses, there's a very interesting paper that came out from Kingston University. Most small business, I think they said like 68%, start off as global businesses already with this perception that they're there to trade internationally. A lot of those businesses become international as a result of having an order from someone overseas. And so they just morph into this area. The advice is about how do you make that business how do you make that small business medium and large? And to get that transformational change, you do need, in my opinion, really good sector advice, really good understanding as to how you structure your contracts, how you position yourself to get the funding that enables you to grow.
So really what you're saying then is part of maybe a team that you consolidate and you bring together.
Correct.
You've got somebody like yourself who's giving advice on one aspect, then you've got somebody talking about legal contracts, and then you've also got to understand actually about your market as well, for that matter.
Correct. And it is very remarkable as to how quickly a small business can be a very large business. And I'm thinking of one company that I've done some work on. Its net tangible assets were less than $1 million. 5 years later, it's got over $500 million of turnover.
Which is phenomenal growth.
Which is phenomenal growth. And I think
that brings its own problems, doesn't it?
Well, what's interesting about trade finance from a banker's perspective is that the risks on trade finance is unbelievably low, because the risk is not on the exporter, it's on the end buyer. And those end buyers typically are much larger institutions than the exporter themselves.
So are you saying then that from the banking perspective, or from the SME's perspective, when they go to the bank, it should be relatively easy then to get the finance that they need?
It should be, but it's not. All right.
And there lieth the tale. That's the problem, isn't it?
There is a gap, and there's an information gap, there's an expectations gap, there's a gap in terms of timing, and there's a gap in terms of experience.
All right, well, what we're going to do, we're going to talk a little bit more about all of that. If you are a small to medium scale enterprise at the moment, maybe you're just a medium sized business, maybe you're a large business, but you haven't been looking overseas, you haven't been looking for export finance up until now. Well, we're going to be looking at some of the things that you will need to consider if it comes to the day where you actually are going to be doing that exporting to become an international, a global brand. So all that's to come. My guest on today's show is Gabby Buck, and Managing Director of GKB Ventures Limited and Chairman of the British Bankers Association Export Finance and Trade Committee. It's all to come on this edition of the programme, and it should be a real insight. We've also got some other guests coming up a little bit later on the programme as well, for that matter. You're watching Business Connections Live. Great to have you with us, and more in just a few moments' time. So then, a good show today, already very interesting, looking into the abyss that is going to be export finance. I'll tell you what we should do, though, is just take a break for a moment and look back at what we did on last week's edition of the programme. Last week's show, we were speaking to Emma Tarring and also Neve Hutchinson from the Marketing Matrix on how to launch a brand new business. A real insight, once again, on how you should be using PR and marketing within your business, and maybe, once again, the considerations. And it's like all things, it all ties together. If you're looking at being a global business and you're looking at exporting, then you need the advice that Gabby's given you. If you're looking at how you start your business, how you establish your business, your brand, then Neve and Emma were the ladies that you need to be talking to as well. It was a cracking show. Just to give you a bit of a feel of what happened on last week's edition of Business Connection Live, here are the ladies, Emma and Neve. On today's show, we're going to be discussing how to launch a new business. It's one of those things that I suppose we all come across eventually. Maybe you've done it, maybe you've done it numerous times, or maybe you're thinking about doing it. Maybe you've just left an organisation, maybe you've left the company at the moment, you've got redundancy payout there, and you're thinking, you know what, I'm going to be my own boss once and for all. How do you go about doing it? How do you go from just you through to being a successful business? We've got some experts with us today. My guests are Emma Tarring and Neve Hutchinson from the Marketing Matrix.
I think it's really easy to think that, yes, starting your own business now is much simpler, and in a lot of ways it is. The problem comes in that there are so many options and so many ways of marketing yourself now. It's very difficult to choose the best ones for you.
That being able to communicate really, really clearly and actually get your message across. You know, we were looking a few years ago, people were very into search engine optimization. All that mattered was getting your keywords into everything you said as many times as possible.
Just stuff them in there.
It was awful to read, wasn't it? I mean, it was painful. And luckily now, the way that, you know, the sophistication, it means that people now have to be really clear about what they offer and really get that out there and think about who they're talking to as well as what they're actually providing. Clarity is always that word we come back to, and we sit down, we have a very structured brief we take from clients when we first start working with them. It goes right back to, you know, what do you do, who do you do it for? It's a process that we've honed over a few years now. It's really standing in your your customer's shoes, so knowing who your prospective customer is, and then stand where they stand, think what's their pain, what keeps them awake at night, what can't they do that your business can help them with.
One of the other most important foundational pieces that we like to make sure we've clarified as well is the sales process that's involved, because sometimes that isn't completely as well thought through as it could be. So we'll also map that out to make sure that from the very first time that you come across somebody all the way through to hopefully working with them, there's a very nice smooth sales process in there as well. As you say, social media is easy, it's not easy for everybody actually, and cherry picking exactly what you should do. And once you know your ideal client, you'll know exactly which channels are going to suit them, because you'll know where they hang out. But actually it's understanding, where is all this social media going? Where's all the communication going? What's your most wanted response from all of this? And that's where your website comes into play. From a social media point of view, it's difficult to, as you say, work out which of those followers are the ones that are important to you, which is why we like to drive all those visits to a website where you can have something for somebody to be able to download. The whole point of all of this that we're talking about is to help people get to know, like and trust you. And how can you do that unless you give away a lot of stuff? And your tone of voice, your way of doing things is always going to be different from somebody else's. So no, we say give it as much as you can away.
Is a nice little digest. Maybe your accountant sent you something, the budget happened and this is what you need to know from the budget. And one piece of paper, you don't want pages and pages, you don't want to know everything, but you do want to know what's relevant for you, and you don't want to spend hours trawling for it. So wasn't that helpful that popped into your inbox and you'd got it ready-made? I'm Emma Tarring from the Marketing Matrix, and the thing I'm most passionate about, the advice I would give any new business setting out, is make sure you know exactly who those people are that you're selling to. We all think we know what our customers look like and who they are, but actually taking that to more depth, thinking about exactly who the customer is that you're selling to. Develop that customer persona, give them a name, look them up on LinkedIn, and actually every time you're writing or you're speaking, speak to that particular customer.
I'm Eve Hutchinson and I'm from the Marketing Matrix, and another key booster in starting up a new business is to understand what it is exactly that you do, and answering those key questions: who, where, what, why and when. And one of those most important of those is to know your why and to understand why you're running your business, because that's going to help your customers really engage with you, and to be really specific about the services that you offer. And if you can break those down into products and packages which can be set at different pricing levels to suit different kinds of customers, then you're going to make it really easy for your customers to buy from you.
Two lovely ladies, well worth talking to if you do get the opportunity. They're called the Marketing Matrix. If you want to go along and find out more about them, you can go to our website at businessconnectionslive.com. A real insight in what you should be doing when it comes to establishing your business. You're watching Business Connections Live. My guest on today's show is Gabby Buck, Managing Director of GKB Ventures Limited and Chairman of the British Bankers Association Export Finance and Trade Committee. Listen, we kind of give a bit of an insight at the very beginning of the programme about the issues that small businesses are going to have. There's got to be and you kind of alluded to this question. Why then do so many SMEs have their export sales finance turned down? I mean, where are they going wrong? Who's at fault here? Are they going to the wrong banks? Are they asking the wrong questions or putting the wrong information in front of the bankers as such? Or are the banks getting it wrong? Are they looking at it and maybe don't have the knowledge that they need?
All of the above, I think.
Thank you very much. Next question.
I think they are... there's a lot of change going on, and let's take the banks as a first part of that. They are under huge amount of regulatory change, which requires them to do much more due diligence, and that is much more time consuming at a time when they're having to cut costs. So SMEs who have a proposal together that fulfills all of the questions that the banks are looking for are the ones that get a yes. The SMEs, on the other hand, are often approaching the wrong banks, and they're approaching the banks with a business proposition that doesn't resonate with the banks themselves. So they're putting forward projections and putting forward a base case study that the banks are looking at and are confused as to what the ask is. So there's a lot of times that the SMEs are just not pre-positioning themselves well. The business proposition that they're putting forward to the banks is badly constructed. They haven't got the legal aspects tied up. They haven't got the counterparty risks properly defined. They're not using the language that bankers are looking for and looking to present that in an efficient manner.
So can you put any clarity on that then? Is there a way that you can say what you need to be considered? What is a bank looking for then? What is the piece within the document that they've been presented with that the bank is looking for? What are the key words? What are the things? How do you hit the bank's buttons?
Well, the banks need to know, for example, on the commercial contracts, that the payment obligation from the buyer is unconditional, irrevocable. There's no set-off, there's no counterclaim, so it's a sum due at a certain date for a certain amount. Against that, the bank is able to discount that as a form of financing. If there's a question mark on the robustness of the legality of the commercial contracts, that puts a question mark in the bank as to whether there's a payment there that it can finance against.
Is there not a danger, though, that by doing all this, and because the banking industry is becoming more competitive, that you're now actually making it more difficult for the banks to attract the customers to come in to ask for the finance, because they're not doing it for free, are they? They actually do want to lend the money. But we've now got all these other opportunities out there where companies can come along and say, well, I won't go to the bank to finance it. I'll go elsewhere to finance it. So aren't they doing themselves a disservice nearly?
Well, there are new entrants into a market. There will always be new entrants into a market where there's a business opportunity. So there is a cycle going on that the banks have retracted because of the cost associated with this business, and new entrants are saying to themselves, here's a business opportunity. I don't see that dynamic will stay the same as it is today, and I think that will change. Banks, quite rightly, only make money if they lend money. So there becomes a point in time that they will see it good business sense for them to be much more responsive. But at the same time, SMEs need to be cognizant of the fact that they need to be making themselves much more professional in the way that they present to the bank.
Now, you've sat behind the desk, I would imagine, numerous times, and the document has landed in front of you. And I'm kind of going back to the question I asked before, what are you truly looking for in there? You're obviously looking for everything that you said, that it's going to be paid, it's properly secure in law, and everything is there anything else they should be thinking about? Do they have to paint pictures? Do they have to capture the bank manager's imagination? What are the buzzwords they need to be using when they come in to excite the banker to lend them the money?
That's a really good question. I think that they are looking for working with an SME that truly understands and has passion for the business and sector that they're in. Someone who really is aware of the dynamics and is a true professional in whatever that they do. The bank is also having to take good faith and understand that the individuals of that company are of good standing. And no balance sheet will actually tell you that. A lot of banking, particularly in trade finance, is about the individual. So if a question is asked, but the wrong answer is given back, or there's a question mark in the banker's mind about the validity of that answer, that puts a bank off. So you're far better to be very open up front by saying, look, we do understand this, we have this covered, and these are the areas that we're uncertain and we need some support and advice. Trust, confidence, belief in the management are very, very important if you're an SME. So you need to position yourself and have a good understanding as to that the mechanics of what you're producing is going to be attractive to the bank. And banks love supporting an SME if it can be an SME that's going to be transformational. Because the relationship between that bank and that SME is very, very strong. If you've helped a customer grow their business 5, 6, 10-fold, you have a customer for life.
It's not the old thing, though, is it, that the bank is giving you an umbrella when it isn't raining, but the moment it starts to rain and things go wrong, that you ask for the umbrella back. It's not that, though, that's happening, is it?
No, I think there is a the market's very fragmented from the banking perspective. SMEs are a little frustrated. I'm going back to this void information gap, culture gap between government, industry and banking. We need to bring that much more closely together. And if we can do that, then I think that it's going to be much better for SMEs who will have an array of different relationships, knowing which bank to approach for which particular exports.
So we're positioning our business in the right place as far as the bank is concerned. We're using the right language now. We understand what the bank wants to hear. We've got the expertise. We are the experts in what we're doing, and we've been thinking strategically about the situation we're in, and we understand where our weaknesses are, so we've come clean, we've been completely truthful. What about the tools themselves? I mean, are we in a good place? Is the UK a good place to be looking for this kind of finance for exporting? I mean, the London banking market, for instance, is that a good place to be starting if you are looking for the money?
That's, the answer to that is yes, particularly if you're in London. One of the most interesting sources of data that came out of the Cole Commission was that SMEs and mid-sized companies have a very good handle as to what is available in terms of products and services from the whole financial community if you're within the M25. The further you went north, the less knowledge and understanding that companies had as to what was on their doorstep.
And conversely, is that the same with the banking industry itself? I mean, does the banking industry, the further north we go, does it too lose the expertise that we've got in London?
I'm a shareholder of a bank. I'm pensioned out by a bank, so I have to be very careful on that. But I would say
that says it all, actually.
I would say that that the expertise that is required to support an exporter is quite a skilled resource, and it's very difficult to have that skilled resource spread across the country. So in reality, the answer to that, Steve, it is in London. It's often in the head offices of these banks, and it is a challenge for SMEs to know which bank and who in that bank they need to be speaking to.
Do you know, thank you for the honest answer, because I think there will be a lot of businesses that will be watching this programme and they'll be thinking to themselves, so how do I approach this? And if I am in the regions, if I'm around the country, if I'm in the great northeast or the great northwest of the country, how do I approach it? Is it a case that they come to London?
No, I think, and what the UK government are doing, which is very useful, is UKTI, UK Export Finance. They have these export finance advisors who are around the UK. The British Chambers of Commerce. These are the local sources of information that I would advocate an SME needs to go and speak to first, and through them would be able then to speak to the right institutions in London.
What about the follow-through afterwards? Because we go through this whole process. It's a bit like when you go networking. People will meet you, take your card, and you'll never hear from them again. Is that what we're talking about when it comes to follow-through? Is it constant communication with the bank, telling them where we are, telling them what we're doing, telling them how we're progressing?
And I think that's, yes, the SMEs are poor at this. I think part of it is that they don't feel confident, generally speaking, to have that ongoing discussion with the banks, particularly if they're based in the city. They feel that we're a small institution, they're a very large institution. But I think it's very important that the SME does that. It's important really to keep the banks on board and to ensure that once you've done your initial pitch, that you get an answer quickly. And to do that, you need to respond back to the bank with any questions and queries that they may have. And SMEs feel uncomfortable in doing that. And often, my sense is that they don't have the resources to follow through quickly. They get sidetracked on other businesses and other aspects of their business. You know, by definition, an SME is hands to the pump often, and they don't have dedicated global sales finance personnel within their companies, and so therefore they can easily get distracted. And you know, if you leave things by a month or so, the bank that you initially did your pitch to could quite easily forgotten who you were, let alone be ready to respond to you when you do eventually come back to them.
Well, we'll talk a little bit more about the contingencies maybe perhaps you should be looking at. And if you do go to your bank and they say no, what do you do then? Is it all over, or do you start looking and going elsewhere? My guest on today's show is Gabby Buck, Managing Director of GKB Ventures Limited and also Chairman of the British Bankers Association Export Finance and Trade Committee. More to come on this edition of Business Connections Live. It's interesting because, you know, like always, we're trying to give a balanced view right across the board, and it is, you know, something that we haven't come across, but something potentially as a small business we may find ourselves in a position of looking globally. How do you go about doing that? So it really is a real insight. Of course, there are two sides to this particular equation. What we do have is we've got the bankers side of it, but then you've, as Gabby's already alluded to, that we've got the legal side of things. You're going to need lawyers to be involved at some stage, and you've got to make certain that you are obeying all the legal regulations for the particular market that you are selling into. A few weeks back, we had Stuart Miller. He's the Managing Director of Warwick Legal Network. He came on the programme, and we were talking about the legal ramifications of when it comes to exporting.
Well, my name's Stuart Miller, a co-founding partner of EBL Miller Rosenfeld. We're a law firm in London, and we have offices in Frankfurt and Dusseldorf, and through our cooperative partnerships there we are across about 27 or 28 countries, and that really reflects what our clients do. They either start from the UK and they move out into the world, or they come here to invest as inward investors, creating jobs in this economy. When we are advising British exporters, the first thing that we talk about, as we've been talking about in this morning's programme, has been would be the areas of culture and getting your team ready and understanding the market opportunity. And it would be wrong of me to suggest that you could seriously do international business without a partnership that goes way beyond mere lawyers like myself. You have to have a decent finance department, a really good understanding of your export trade. You need to take local advice in areas like accountancy, make sure that your books are right, make sure that your local contracts are right, have a decent bank to hand. Take care of all of those relationships just as you would with your core business in the UK. Once you've gone through those things, then think in terms of really detailed structure. And essentially, if you're a British business going abroad, you're either going to be an exporter or you're going to be an investor. If you're an exporter, then the key things that you would want to bear in mind are, first of all, if we're going to export directly into a marketplace, are our terms and conditions suitable for the purpose? Will they help us if we have a legal problem in the country where we're exporting? And the other really critical area is, if we're exporting goods especially, but sometimes services, do we have to think in terms of local consumer protections? And if so, what do we know about those? Because the law protects in most countries consumers far more than it does other businesses. B2B, business to business situations, are much more linked to a freedom to trade than you'll ever find that you can get away with if you're dealing with consumers. But you might not be just exporting directly, you might be using a local agent or distributor. And if you are, pick them carefully, take good trade references, and make sure that you understand what's in your trade, in your terms and conditions, so that you really set them up with a decent document. In some cultures, you'll be familiar with the idea that things are done on a handshake. In most cultures, that's a real risk to your business. And I would really suggest get any agency or distributorship, if possible, into writing, and don't hang around on that subject. The other possibility for your international export business is to look at a business model like a franchise. In some countries, franchises are more highly regulated than others. They are essentially a variant of commercial law. You should be able to adapt your business as an export business to one of those models. On the other hand, if your business plan suggests to you you need foot soldiers on the ground and an agent and distributor aren't going to be the ones to do it for you, then think in terms of either setting up your own branch office, but be careful about local tax if you do so. Think in terms of setting up a subsidiary, might be a separate limited company, with all of the advantages that come with the possibility of being able to ring fence your trading liabilities into this other limited company entity. You might also think in terms of allying locally with another business and having some form of network partnership. That's a really good route. If you're uncertain how much capital commitment you can sustain, you may be trying to expand in several marketplaces at once, and if what you really need is a strong after-sales service, it could be that allying with a local business who've already got the infrastructure is the best way to go. Whichever it is for you, good luck, but whichever it is for you, make sure you take some decent advice.
It's all about taking the right advice. That's what Stuart is saying there. That's Stuart Miller, Managing Director of Warwick Legal Network. You're watching Business Connections Live. My guest on today's show is Gabby Buck. He's the Managing Director of GKB Ventures Limited and also Chairman of the British Bankers Association Export Finance and Trade Committee. It's just a part-time job that he does. It's nothing heavy at all. He's barely busy. We kind of went into that break and we were talking about if the bank says no. We'll get to that, I suppose, in just a moment. What's your key advice? I've got a business owner watching right now. He's looking at you. What are the process? Let's just work our way through the process and the things that they just need to remember. When it comes to actually starting the whole process, what would you say to them?
Well, with export finance, I think one of the most often fundamental error that the exporter has when it presents to the bank is not spending enough time and energy looking at the buyer side, because this is where the bank is taking the risk. So I think it's understanding that the bank is not looking at you as an SME. Then obviously will need to understand that you have that capability to execute the commercial contract. But in reality, it's about the counterparty risk of that buyer. You know, which country they're in, the geopolitical issues around that country, that entity within that country, why they are buying your equipment or services. Are they known to that particular bank? Has that bank done its KYC and AML, anti-money laundering regulations on that buyer? And if that bank doesn't have any knowledge of who that buyer is, then right from day one, the SMEs is starting from the wrong place. You need to find a bank that has a deep understanding of the buyer end, because that's where the risk is.
So what's the question then that the business owner should ask the bank? Do you walk in there and go, by the way, if you can answer the next 3 questions, you could be potentially the bank I'm going to work with? Is there a clear way, or do you go to organisations like, you know, the British Chamber of Commerce and people like that, the CBI, and do you ask for their recommendation?
I think that's a very good suggestion. Go to the CBI and just say, look, or the British Chambers of Commerce, I'm looking to do trade in XYZ country. Which financial institutions has presence there and has an understanding of doing business in that market? And they'll give you 10, 15 banks. And that's your first port of call, because they're the ones who would understand that counterparty risk of your end customer.
Because there are a lot of support organisations out there. I know you very kindly gave me a list before we started, but the Confederation of British Industry, obviously the CBI, the Federation of Small Businesses. Now, a lot of people would think of the FSB as being an organisation that's very UK-concentric. They're quite small, quite little. I mean, I know they're a big organisation, but we're talking about within the British Isles. And of course, that isn't the case. They've really got the expertise there, haven't they?
If they don't have the expertise, they are linked in with other organisations. So they're linked in with the British Exporters Association, who's in turn linked in with UKTI, who's in turn linked in with UK Export Finance. So there are, for example, taking UK Export Finance as a great example, here's a government institution that will provide support and financing for UK exporters who are unable to get support from their banks. So there is this catch-all support functionality there by government. The problem is most SMEs are unaware as that these facilities exist and unaware as to how best to tackle and approach and get the funding from these organisations.
So the question or the answer has got to be, if you are thinking about exporting and you're finding yourself in the doldrums at the moment and you can't think how to move forward with it, stop for a moment, and there is a list of all these particular organisations on our Business Connections Live website. If you go there, you'll be able to get at least a bit of a clue where you can go and the people that you can talk to. I notice on your list as well that you do say that you should be talking to lawyers, and also, I suppose, keep talking to the banks as well.
Correct. You know, at the end of the day, as an SME, they need funding for their exports. Banks are one source of funds providers, and so the stronger the relationship you have with that particular bank or a group of banks, the better the opportunities are of securing that funding.
Now, we're in a world of bank bashing or bankers bashing. That's what we're doing at the moment. It seems to a certain extent that people don't understand truly what the banks are trying to achieve, and therefore, because they don't understand, they feel that they can have a go at them. So, is it right? Should SMEs be blaming the banks if they say no, or should they be maybe taking an introspective look at what they're producing and showing to the banks, and maybe it's because they're getting it wrong that the bank is saying no? Should they be doing that?
They should be fostering a relationship with their banks. I think it's very difficult for a bank that's been bashed by a particular customer to then extend them credit. You know, the companies that are successful in terms of obtaining long-term finance on an ongoing basis, not just for one contract, but for all of their exports, are those that are much more receptive with their relationship with their banks, much more open and much more conducive in terms of how do we do business together. Because at the end of the day, Steve, people do business with people. And so...
Is that still the case, do you think?
I really do believe...
I mean, there is the joke. The computer says no. When you are an SME, if you're looking for a substantial financial backing for an export project, is someone going to be sitting there and blindly putting figures into a computer and then going, it says no?
No, well, I know for a fact because I represent... all of the international banks and the main UK banks when doing trade finance and export finance. And I know these people individually, and I know that they're very conscientious in terms of what they are doing. They want to do business. They are... You know,
so the money is there,
the money is there. The funding is there, particularly for short-term working capital and short-term export finance business. Each of these bankers has their own or have their own autonomy to do business. So it's not, you know, this business is not a very generic one structure fits all. I think in the 25 years I was doing export finance, I cannot think of 2 transactions I did in a similar manner, because every exporter and every buyer are different. And so therefore, these are bespoke financing. There's no computer. It's about the banker's ability to put these facilities together.
Now that's assuming, of course, that the banker has the working knowledge of the export territory or the area that the particular SME is going into. So I suppose if that mismatch comes about, the bank may well indeed say no. So as a business, what do I do then?
Well, you need, and that's you know, your first way of shifting the banks into various buckets is to look at which sector are you in. Is this a sector that this particular or these groups of banks are particularly interested in? And then which geography is this export going to, and does this bank have a particular interest in that geography? And if you have the two that are aligned, sector and geography, then those are the banks that you target.
Who are we talking about then? Are these aren't going to be your high street banks, are they? These are going to be specialist banks. So where do we, once again, is it going back to the chambers, the CBI, to get the recommendations of the appropriate people we should be talking to?
Yeah, I think if you look at UK Export Finance, the government department that provides support, on their web pages they'll have a whole list of banks that are there to support exporters. And you know, there's 20 or 30 banks who you could phone and just say to them, I'm interested in this particular program that I'm pursuing overseas. Do you have a sector interest in that particular geography? And some will very quickly say yay or nay to you. And you end up with a list of 4 or 5, and those are the ones that you start to foster a relationship with. It will take time. There isn't a one one-stop shop that an SME can go to and everything is done for them. And that's part of the failing that we have here in the UK. And one of the outcomes from the Coal Commission was about, can we bring this all together? Because it is a very fragmented industry.
You keep referring back to the Coal Commission. Just explain, for those people that haven't heard of it, just explain a little bit about the Coal Commission and what it was trying to derive at.
Our trade figures in the last 30 years have been and are getting worse on a year-by-year basis, i.e. we import more than we export. And that's not good for the overall economy. So the UK government has been very clear in terms of setting a target, a national target, in terms of £1 trillion of exports per annum by 2020. And the Coal Commission was set up to give a steerage to UK government. If we're trying to get this to this target, what do we need to do that puts UK industry, whether you're on a large company or an SME, on a much more equal footing with the competitors around the world for these exports? If you think about the economy worldwide post 2007, 2008, the GDP growth of various countries is not going to be fueled domestically. You know, the public sector spending is contracting. Retail spending, you know, is at best flat. So if you want to grow your economy, you want to encourage your exporters to increase their economic value by being more successful overseas. Now, the problem with that is all the other countries are doing that. And we here in the UK are lagging behind with other countries. And part of the Coal Commission was to take a review of where we stand as the UK in comparison to other countries and give a steerage to UK government. If you want to be more successful, these are the things that you need to do.
We'll talk about the things that we need to do from the Coal Commission in just a few moments' time. We'll also talk about perhaps maybe for SMEs and for finding finance for exporting, how the whole EU referendum thing could actually affect that. But only briefly, we'll only have a few moments to talk about that. Hope you're enjoying today's programme. If you are at business and you're thinking about looking at the whole world of export, maybe you've already been down the route at the moment and you found it an absolute minefield. Perhaps maybe today's programme has clarified some of the issues that you came up against and maybe has given you some advice on how you could perhaps maybe approach them in a slightly different way to be more successful when it comes to getting out there and getting the finance that you need so that you can go through your export. We're going to be talking in just a few moments' time about the export contract as well, for that matter. We kind of alluded to it earlier on. It's all important. It seems to be one of the cornerstones of the entire process. Our guest on today's show is Gabby Buck, Managing Director of GKB Ventures Limited. You're watching Business Connections Live. As always, great to have you with us, and I hope you're enjoying today's programme. I suppose the thing about the shows are that they go from one extreme to the other. One week we're looking at social media and what you should be tweeting. The next week we're looking at what the banks should be doing when it comes to looking for finance, and we're talking about millions of pounds worth of finance when it comes to exporting. The other thing, though, that's important for any business is the way that they present themselves publicly to the media. How do you go about doing that? We have seen some diabolical interviews on the TV where it's all gone horribly, horribly wrong. And it's probably done more damage to the organisation that the spokesperson is talking for than they would have done if they'd have said nothing at all. Now, we here at Business Connections Live, we operate training courses for business managers just like you. Crisis management is what it's all about when it comes to handling the media. It's our media training course, how to handle the media. We've had a number of different large blue chip organisations come on our training course. We'd like to offer it to you right now as well. Just to give you a bit of an insight and why it would work for you, let's talk to somebody from ISIS.
I'm James Griffin from Iris Software, and my team have just completed the How to Handle the Media workshop. It was a really great course, it was really fun, and it was a really unique way for them to polish their presentation skills and learn how to answer difficult questions under pressure. So I'd highly recommend this to anybody that values those skills and really wants a great day out with their team.
It's a cracking course. James Griffin there from Iris. And if you want more details about that, you can simply go to our website. You can talk to myself, Steve Highland, or to Linda Bazant. If you want to email us, you can at studio@businessconnectionslive.com. Just get in touch with us there, ask the questions. If you want, you can always give us a telephone call. We love talking to you. And maybe it's probably going to be the best way, because each and every course is turnkey to that specific industry. So if you want to call us, 01784 256 777. And if you want to follow our strain of consciousness, our stream of consciousness, you can follow us on Twitter at BCL Business TV. My guest on today's show is Gabby Buck, Managing Director of GKB Ventures Limited and Chairman of the British Bankers Association Export Finance and Trade Committee. It's been really interesting. We were talking there a little bit about the Cole report and what it had found. Export contracts. Have we finished on the Cole report? There was just I think we had, hadn't we?
I think we have.
Yeah. Export contracts, the legalese of it all. Let's make the lawyers a little bit of money, shall we, right now as well. How important is that? Is that truly the cornerstone of all of this as well? If the banking is one part, then the contract is the other, surely?
Undoubtedly. Without strong legal robustness in the commercial contract, in the financing, in the documents between the various counterparties, if it's poorly drafted, it all falls apart very, very quickly.
So would that be the first port of call then, to make certain that the contract is watertight before you go to the bank?
Yes. And I would advocate, when I'm acting as an advisor to particular clients, I would ask and drill with them who have they been using in terms of drafting the commercial contract. Does it have this particular clause? Does it have these exemptions? Is it under UK law? Show me how robust is this? And if this has been written on the back of a fag packet, then it's not going to get financed. It's not going to be. Not
get £2,000 or £2 million. Yeah, go to jail.
Go to jail. In that, the cornerstone of trade finance, if you think about it, an SME doesn't have large amounts of assets themselves. What they do have is a contract, and that contract is with a good client, a good buyer overseas. That's the asset. And if that asset is poorly structured, it has the ability for the buyer to wriggle out or to exit at a particular point in time, or to counterclaim on any payments, then the value of that asset to the SME and to the bank becomes less. So it is imperative that the legal input into that commercial contract is there from day one. And it's something I would look for very early on. And if it's not there, I start to lose interest myself.
And finally, on this whole area then, if at first you don't succeed, is it a case of try again?
Yes, but don't repeat everything that you've done the first time round.
Change it each time.
Well, you need to understand why you haven't been successful. And I will say it is difficult for an SME to get their first contract financed.
Is it worth asking the banks for feedback? Is it worth saying to them,
yes,
why have you said no? Will they give it to you?
I think they would. Whether they would tell you honestly, I think it's about the breadth and depth of that relationship. If you've been someone who is banker bashing, they're unlikely to tell you anything. If you have been genuinely trying to create a relationship and you've been constructive about what it is that you want to achieve, then I would say that most, if not all, bankers will tell you, look, we failed because of this, this and this.
I hope you found today's information really interesting, but there is something else on the horizon at the moment. We've got the EU referendum just around the corner. How's that going to affect this entire area? Are we going to be in a situation, if, say, we come out, is it going to make it more difficult to get the finance? If we stay in, will it be easier? What's your feeling on it? Because you're pro staying in, aren't you?
On a personal level, I am pro staying in. I think it is absolute madness. If you're
don't mince about with your words, all right?
Absolute madness. If you, as an individual, have been used to working, travelling in Europe without any restriction, and I have children who I would want them to have the ability to be able to work and live wherever they will want to across Europe. We have an enormous market where we need to trade. And to take that ability for UK companies that they are unable to trade into those markets and would have to be dependent on new trade agreements, then we're going to take a backward step.
But is there not a case that because we are such a large market, fifth largest market in the world, is there not going to be a case that the EU as such will still be hungry to trade with us?
I think there's a big case that EU will always want to export from them to us. I often hear from Brexit about BMW cars.
Yes,
well, so long
that's a big market. 70 million people in this country.
And so long as people in the UK want a BMW, then the Germans will sell us a BMW. But if we have a trade barrier, it may make it more expensive for us to import the goods that we want. But the import side, I don't think is a real problem.
But wouldn't that mean that we would drop our imports, therefore it might balance out a little bit more? It could actually be beneficial then that we stop importing the likes of BMWs and maybe we drive more Jaguars.
If everybody could afford a Jaguar, then I think that our economy would not be dependent on Europe. But the reality is, Steve, right, we need to trade and we need also to export. And I think one of the, which is quite close to me on a personal level, is that the finance industry is very dependent on having free movement of services across Europe.
So from your perspective of being in the banking industry, is it just that you're worried that the banking industry would move from the UK maybe to Frankfurt to Paris? I mean, it's such a political movement, isn't it, what we're talking about here? That's what people are worried about, isn't it? It's the politics of Europe affecting us as a small island, I suppose.
Yeah, I can't answer the question as to whether the banks themselves feel really concerned that the business will move out or the bankers will move out of Europe. But I do know that London is a big trading house for the euro currency. Mm-hmm. And I can imagine that the French and the Germans would love the opportunity to strengthen the Paris market and the Frankfurt market. And if there's a way of doing that through trade barriers, then I can imagine that a lot of our business will move to those markets.
There is if you were saying to somebody who was listening to this and trying to influence the way they're going to vote, because it is important, it's very difficult, this particular vote, isn't it? Unlike where you're voting for a particular party, every individual vote is either a yes or a no, effectively. So very different from electing a government. What would you say to them? What would be the considerations you would say? Because people will pick up their newspaper, their red tops, and there'll be different perspectives from every area. What would you say to them about which way to go?
I only have one view, and the view is that
stay in
that the cost, and there is a cost of being part of a wider family, is, in my opinion, far less a cost than the benefits that we get. The fact that we have the ability to attract inward investment because we're part of Europe, whilst at the same time still keeping our currency independent from the Eurozone, is a big driver of foreign direct investment into the UK. And if we're not part of that European market, then I would see a lot of that investment move to other countries at a later point in time.
There you go, you've been warned. Gabby, at the end of every programme we always ask our guests to look straight down camera at number one and to give us the key takeaways. So for small businesses, the key takeaways they need to remember when it becomes to getting the finance so that they can export successfully. Please say who you are, where you're from, and then straight down camera number one. The airways are all yours.
Well, thank you very much. My name is Gabriel Buck. I'm the Chairman and Managing Director of GKB Ventures. I'm an independent consultant looking to support SMEs in terms of their exports and their export credit growth. Exporting is, for a lot of companies, part of their DNA from day one. Do not be disheartened if you are rejected from the banks. The banking market is much more fragmented. So my key words of advice to you is: 1, pre-position; 2, make sure that the advice that you're getting fits your own particular objectives as a business. 3, make sure that your propositions are in the language that the banks understand. 4, persevere and follow through. The market is huge across the world, and for those companies that are exporting and it's part of their DNA, the successes that they get make them much stronger credits. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you very much for coming in. I think it was interesting sort of talking about the different aspects that we've looked at today, the fact of where to start, the fact that you can go elsewhere, and, you know, just don't be stifled by the fact that you only go to a single bank. If they say no to you, maybe you're getting it wrong, step back for a moment and readdress. I think it's also important for them to remember as well that there is so many resources out there now that they can talk to, and that an exporting organisation, an exporting company is not going to be on its own. It can actually go to a number of different people who have got that expertise. We mentioned the CBI, the Chamber, the Federation for Small Business, who I made sound very small earlier on. Actually, they are a huge organisation and have got years and years and years of expertise and experience, and also the importance that you mentioned earlier on of that whole contract as well. That I suppose we can't say just how important that is to understand the territory that you're going to and the clauses that are contained within your contract, because that's what you're looking for, isn't it?
It's the cornerstone. Having strong legal commercial contracts that are bankable is the first thing the banks are looking for.
In a year's time, in 10 seconds, where do you think we'll be?
I hope we're still in Europe, and I hope that our economy is much more robust than it is today.
There we are. Listen, I hope you've enjoyed today's show. As always, it's interesting when you get an expert to come into the studio and we talk about the different areas. As always, we're trying to give advice to you, the business owner, the entrepreneur, the SME. If you are out there and you're watching this particular program, if you're sitting there and you've been taking notes all the way through the day, please do visit the website as well. There's lots of information about what we talked about today. Also, contact details as well for Gabby, for that matter as well. A real insight, because a lot of us want to grow our business. We all seem to hit a plateau in the growth of our business, and then how do you move on from that? Perhaps maybe you've exhausted the market in your local market, but here you are, you've got a situation where you can now go global. Listen, I hope you've enjoyed the show. My thanks to you, Gabby, for coming in today. It's been a real insight. Thank you for being on the show.
You're more than welcome, Steve. Thank you.
So there we are, another great show in the can. Thank you very much to my guest today. Let's just look forward and see what we've got lined up over the next couple of weeks there. Next week's show, we've got Robin Dunwoody. She's coming in to talk to us. She's the Corporate Affairs Manager at Miller Brands. She's going to be talking about beer. No, she's not. She's going to be talking about how twists and turns can change your career path and why you should embrace that change. Fascinating program. Met the lady the other evening. A real insight as well. I think you're going to find it really fascinating. That's Robin Dunwoody joining us on the program next week. Coming up in the next few weeks, Julian Ponan, CEO of Creative Nature, will be joining us. Rachel Taplin, media matchmaker. She's going to be coming in. Rachel, really interesting. If you're a small business, you're thinking, how do I get more PR, more press for my business? How do I get on the local radio station? How do I do that? Rachel will be telling you some of the key tricks that you need to find out with her Blue Boo Media company. Chris Harris, Group Marketing Director of the AA, is going to be joining us on the show. Dilys Gawan, International Sales and Marketing Leader and Coach and Speaker, will also be on the programme as well. If you're in the Cambridge area, don't forget, you can watch the show on Cambridge TV Freeview Channel 8 and also on Virgin 159. And if you'd like to sponsor the programme, please get in touch with us. Must be time to roll the credits, because that's it. Your break is all absolutely done for the day. Thank you very much for your time today. Once again, my thanks to Gabby Buck for joining us on the programme. Till we do it all again live next Monday at noon, have yourself a great week and successful business from all the team. See you then. Bye for now. Bye-bye.